Good afternoon. I wish I was here yesterday because I know the question was already asked. How many of you are currently running a co-working space or a co-working community? Okay. How many of you are thinking of starting one or in the process of launching a new co-working space or community? Okay, so this is going to be a bit of a refresher for some people, but really, really importantly timed for others. So we are going to talk about building an awesome co-working community. But before we get started, since this is my first time at CU Asia, we'll do a little bit of an intro so you know who I am and why I am up here talking to you about community. So, my hometown is Toronto, Canada. That's where I built my first 5 co-working spaces. Kensington Market, to be exact, if you're familiar with the area. It's a community-focused neighborhood. So we shut down the streets every weekend. We hang out together in the market. It's very much a people-oriented place. Having grown up in a very small town, this is where I gravitated to when I found myself in the big city of Toronto, and it has a lot of influence on the work I've been doing in community building over the last 15 years. So this is where I got my start in building co-working and collaborative spaces at the Ontario College of Art and Design. I'm an artist at heart. I'm an art school dropout, for those who are interested in my background. My first project was actually building a space for 2,500 students here at the Ontario College of Art and Design, student-funded, student-run space called X-Space. That was in 2003, and it led into Creative Blueprint, which is a company that I built a few years later that focuses on creative workspace and collaborative space for artists and creative entrepreneurs in Toronto and in Seattle. In addition to the co-working space, we also provide events and run galleries in both of those cities. And I know we're talking more about events later, so I'm going to skip over a lot of the event-based material and we'll go straight to community. Foundry was the third co-working community that I launched, also in Toronto, Canada. Foundry is a traditional co-working space. It's open to everyone. It's not arts-focused. We had a strong tech contingency when we started, and it really branched out to include the artists over the years. This is Foundry. My slides are not moving. So in Toronto, we were one of the first co-working spaces. We grew up alongside the Centre for Social Innovation, which is the first Canadian co-working brand. Because there were so many incredible co-working spaces in Toronto, we decided to partner with all of them. We created a collective called the Co-working Toronto Collective, and then we expanded to cover all the spaces in our province of Ontario and formed the Co-working Ontario Collective. From there, I launched the Co-working Health Insurance Plan, which is the first health insurance plan for independent artists and entrepreneurs, and is now available to all artists and indie workers in Canada. I'm also the executive producer of GC Canada, which is part of a global co-working network of conferences. I'm part of the GC Global team as well. This is our most recent event in Beijing. I'm now focused on building a 105,000 square foot co-working community in the heart of the downtown east side in Vancouver, BC. And I'm really having trouble with this slide.
Point it to the computer.
Here? Yeah, they told me here. So here. Thank you. So this is 312 Main in Vancouver. And now we get into the meat of the presentation. So 10 steps to building an awesome co-working community. So like I said, we're going back co-working and community building 101. Again, my experience as an artist really makes me think about building community in the way that you would layer paint on a canvas. And I know this isn't a common reference for most people. But really what it involves, especially with oil painting, is to put all of your colors out on a palette like this, look at what you're trying to build, and over time you're layering and layering and mixing and layering, and this is a work in process. Sometimes it can take up to 8 months for oil painting to dry, so this is an extended process. This is not something that you envision and finish overnight. This is always a work in process. So easily digestible material, I'm going to give you 10 steps to write down about building your community. So the first step would really be to know your market. And That comes in a few different forms, so really get to know your neighborhood. There's a reason why you're opening in the area that you're deciding to open in, and there are probably some really amazing things that will differentiate you from other spaces, and you can find them in your neighborhood. I would suggest touring other collaborative spaces, not just co-working spaces, but any kind of a space that really puts community and people at the heart. So artist work studios, hacker spaces, maker spaces, co-working spaces, universities, libraries, tour all of these spaces and get a good idea of what's out there. And while you're doing that, I would suggest that you make friends with your competition. So if you feel that there are competing co-working spaces where you're opening a co-working space or where you operate, I suggest you need to reframe that thought. See your competitors as potential collaborators and really get to know them. So when you're touring the space, don't sneak in for a tour, introduce yourself. Tell them that you're opening a space or that you run a space down the street and that you'd really like to get to know them and build a relationship. Ask a lot of questions. Ask what's working and ask what's missing in particular. So that is definitely step number one, know your market. Are you changing them or am I changing them? Okay, step number two, please. Number two is to really get to know your members. This is a lot more challenging than many of you might think. So a lot of us assume while we're building a space, and I ran into this in the early days, making this mistake as well, that you think you know what people want, and you design a space that might work for you. But really you're building a space for your members, so understand what needs of theirs are not being met. And you get this from having conversations with the people who are eventually going to be using your space. You need to understand what they are willing to pay, and not what they say they're going to pay. You really need to ask them to put their money where their mouth is. Maybe put a deposit on a membership before they start, or do some serious market research to find out what they really are willing to pay. And some of them are able to contribute in terms of time rather than money, so that's another important question to ask them. None of us got into this business to sell Wi-Fi or coffee or to rent desks to people. I don't think that's why we're here, at least. We're here to build meaningful human connections. And so most of our members, that's what they want, that's why they're in our spaces. They want to be part of something bigger than themselves. They want to expand their networks. They want to increase their productivity. They want to meet new people and share ideas. And so when you're building your community, it's really important to dive deep into why it is that they want to be members in the first place. Step 3 would be to build a supportive team. And this team could be made up of super members, so people who are really interested in joining your space. They can be friends, they can be allies, they could be the other co-working operators in your city. But this doesn't have to be a paid team of staff. It's probably important that it isn't. You need to really surround yourself with people who are supportive of your idea, of what you're trying to build, especially if you're doing this in a market that co-working is new, or the term is not quite understood in the way that it is in some of the more major cities or developed markets around the world. Number 4, most importantly, is to build your community before building the space. And many of the co-working veterans will tell you this, having experienced it, and I can say of all the 8 spaces that I've launched, this is the most important key you can take away from today's talk. Build the community before the space. I'm still on that one. Sorry. It's actually more important anyways than the space. The people are why you're doing this, and so this is going to solve a lot of problems in advance. In the space that we're building in Vancouver, there are 250 members who are waiting to move in when their section opens. Floor by floor, we're launching as it becomes full. So we're never in a point where we are paying to operate the space without it being full. This takes a lot of work. It's been 3 years in process before we open the doors. But that's also 3 years of building the community without paying rent, and 3 years of having amazing events off-site, and 3 years to let those members build connections with each other. Many of them are working together out in the community right now. Many of them are waiting in other co-working spaces, training how to become co-working members while making connections with other people before they move into our space. This is something that we've done at every location, and I was lucky to have that experience in my very first shot at a co-working community for OCAD and XSpace. we had those 2,500 members built into the model before we opened the door. So before we built the space, we got to ask them exactly what they wanted, what problems we could solve for them, and how we could help them be more productive. And so when we opened, and it was wildly successful, that wasn't to my credit. That was because the members told us exactly what they wanted, and we built it for them. And that doesn't necessarily mean building the space that I would build for me to work in. It was all about the members of the space. And this can save you a lot of time and money. Along the same line, it's really important to involve your members in all of the important decisions. There are a few different reasons for this. One, like I said, you're building the space for them, not for you, so they get exactly what they want, and they're willing to pay for that because it's exactly what they want. But the more important reason is that they become invested when they're engaged. And so rather than providing services for the community, you should ensure that your members are participating. And this might take a few forms. Building the furniture when you move into a space. Anyone who's moved a co-working community from one location to another knows that if you get the members to help with the move, that is really an important part of community building for your space. It might take the form of the members just making coffee or doing the dishes for themselves, making snacks for each other rather than having someone paid to come in and do that for them as a service. That all bonds people together in the community, and it really increases that sense of well-being and investment in the space itself. And people take care of a space that they've helped to build. Have them paint a wall, have them bring the furniture in, have them be involved in the events and the programming in the space. Number 6 would be, don't be afraid to curate your community. And so when we're starting out, in many cases, we just take the first people who will pay for your space. Usually that's because you're in the situation where you have rent to pay and you need to put bums in seats. And if you are opening with your community in place first, then this is something that you can afford to do, which is really to pick the best of the best members. If you have a space that's targeted to one market, like artists, you can still look for diversity among the artists. So in our art-based spaces, we make sure we have people who are in graphic design and illustration, working on laptops, as well as people in sculpture or people who are doing other types of physical work and painting. If we had a room full of oil painters, it would be really hard to breathe. If we had a room full of sculpture, it would get really packed really fast, and so diversity is our strength there. So we don't take everyone who wants to join. We really pick the best of the best. If the space starts to get slanted a certain way, where it's really tech heavy and you want it to be a diverse space, then you can actively go out and invite people into the space who would make good members to be able to balance that out. And I think it's important to curate your community. So you can use the support team that you built to reach the networks that you want to engage as well. This is where they come in really handy. Step 7 to building an incredible community is to animate the community with your member events. These are just a few examples of the different types of events we hold in our spaces, but what's important about all of these is that these were all member-created and led events. So again, this isn't something that necessarily meets my needs as an owner-operator. This is something by members and for members. A feminist art conference, a Music Ontario event, a networking event by the Hacker Nest called Tech Nerds Unite. These are all member-driven and member-led events. Variety is really key in our spaces. So variety in terms of timing, time of day, so certain people can attend different events. Variety in terms of the cost. Many of them are free events, but some of them are paid. There's a different level of effort involved as well. Sometimes you just need to roll out of your desk over to the kitchen to participate in an event, and other times you need to show up dressed a certain way and invest some time and energy. There's also some variety in terms of the topics and the methods used because people learn in different ways. But in addition to animating the community with events, you can animate the community through your communications, and we do that in our spaces through Slack and through Facebook groups to keep them engaged. And I would say that our most popular event is the easiest one to host, which is the show and tell event. So I know we're going to go further into events later on, so I'm not going to dive too deep here, but show and tell is the easiest event 4 o'clock Friday, come on down, tell us what you're working on. People are making connections in the space and they really appreciate that, but it really helps to build the community as well. Number 8 is inviting people to experience your community. And it's really important that there are free opportunities for people to try what it is that you are doing. This picture is, I gotta give a bit of backstory. So the 2 people on the left in the front row, Patrick and his wife Tina, became members at one of our spaces about 10 years ago. And everyone else here in this picture now works for them at one of their companies called the Real Escape Game. But every single one of these people became a member at Foundry after coming in for a free trial day or a free event. And that's how they found all of their staff. And those all became Foundry members from coming in for free events. And this is a very common story. These are just some of my most photogenic members, but I would say that we could have hundreds of these photos up on the wall in the last 15 years. And we have spent maybe $500 on marketing in 15 years. It's all word of mouth, and so it's really about giving people the opportunity to experience your community, very low barrier, free trial days, free events. You can have your members hand out passes to friends or family who want to come and try it. One of our most successful promotions in Seattle at the Office Nomads location upstairs of our creative studios is that they give every member the opportunity to give away 5 free trial days a month. And that word of mouth brings in new members, and they're also engaged from the beginning. They're already connected to other people that are working in your space. Number 9 for that strong community is really about cultivating the community in your daily actions. So this is about setting the tone for your members and leading by example. You need to be present in the space. You need to be a member as well, not just an owner-operator. You need to ask questions, make connections, and be engaged in what the members are doing. So some of you may have hosts or connectors, community animators, or community cultivators that take on this role, but it's really important for you to model that behavior first and foremost. Everyone else on the team is taking your lead. Everyone else in the space will do as you do. And so if the first thing you do when you walk in the door is put your head down, go into an office, and get some work done, that's what people are going to act like in your space. But if the first thing you do when you walk in is say hi to a few people and ask them how their day is going and introduce them to someone else who's working on something awesome, that's how they're going to act in the space. Again, going back to the concept at the beginning of the painting, community building is really an ongoing process. So to think that there are going to be some magic steps you can do, boxes you can check, and then you've got a fantastic community is a bit ridiculous. This is something that you are always working on. But having done it for 15 years now in 8 different locations, I can tell you that it gets a lot easier. Once you put those efforts in place, your strong community will attract strong community members. And so people coming through and touring your space will self-select. A lot of people will choose your brand or your location because they've heard by word of mouth that it's a very strong community and they want to be there. And sooner, rather than later, you'll start to see the quality of your members will increase over time. They'll stay longer, they'll be more invested, they'll give more of themselves to others because you've already created that base and that natural environment for them to do so. I definitely know this is true, having members who have been on a month-to-month contract with us for 15 years now. They choose to stick around. There's no other reason for them to do so than they want to be with those people. A few of those groups I've moved three times to different locations across the city, and they're still with us as well. And again, it's not because of me, it's not because of the location, it's because of the other people in that group. So it is ongoing, and you always have to check in. And even if you delegate these tasks to someone else on a community cultivation role or position, it's going to be something that you're going to be doing ongoing. And that's it for the presentation. I wanted to make sure that we left time for Q&A. So.
Thanks so much for that insight. My name is Yori. I've just recently joined Lendlease, developer side now, but used to be in the serviced office and also co-working world for about 10 years. Community is something that obviously the serviced offices have never been great at because they've never been staffed beyond the pure operational teams to curate and engage communities. Co-working spaces, I sometimes see, struggle with how much staff do you put on building community, because again, that's headcount and salaries that you need to pay, even though you'd want to invest also in the people that curate your programs and the events around community. So how do you approach that between building a team that engages and curates your community? There's part of it obviously organic, but also as a business sometimes you need to push that a little bit. How do you make sense of that? From what do you put behind that in terms of resources? How do you justify that cost to your business, etc.? What's your approach been?
So that's a great question, and I would suggest that it really varies based on the size of the space and the revenue that you're working with. So it really scales with your staff team. So when I was operating smaller spaces, anything under 15,000 square feet, for the first year or two, it was me. There was no one else running that space. It was me and maybe a few super members or a volunteer here or there, really setting the tone for the space and working day in, day out on building this community. There are ways that a smaller space like that can scale and grow. So we do a lot of work trade programs. So you can have a community cultivation team entirely built on work trade. So we have some people who have part-time memberships to this space in exchange for being a community cultivator or a host or community animator. There are maybe 10 people now that run those spaces in my absence, all on work trade. When I do bring someone in, it's in a community management role, generally to take care of the facilities in my absence, more so than the community. The best community hosts tend to be community members themselves, and that really doesn't cost anything than the use of a desk. And unless you're completely full, most of us can afford a desk and a chair for someone to do that. In the larger spaces, so something like the Vancouver project is working with about 3.5 million a year. We have a team of 45 staff, 27 volunteers to run 7 floors. Those 27 volunteers are the hands-on people who are actually carrying out all that community building action day in, day out in the space. They're members of the community, they're super members, they're community builders who have been active in the Vancouver community long before our space existed. And those are really the key players there. We have the luxury in a space of that size, and at this point in my career, to be able to hire a director of culture full-time, to pay them well, to focus on that throughout the space, and to have a full-time director of community engagement and a full-time director of programming. That's not something that I've ever had until year 15 in the co-working world. So I wouldn't say that that's common, but I would say that it certainly makes my job a lot easier with 1,200 members to worry about, to have other people on the team who are dedicated to that full time. But it can easily be done at a smaller scale and with little or no financial investment. Yes, the directors support the community members to roll out all of the programming. The Vancouver space is based on democratic engagement, and it's also built as a community co-op, so the members own the space and are also involved in the governance of the space. So if you zoom out, we have 1,200 staff in a way. They're all really invested in the space. Yeah.
Hello. Yep. I'm here. Couple of questions. You mentioned don't be afraid to curate the community, which I'm pretty interested on, because our space now is getting like completely full. When do you just what are you defining as curating a community first, and then at what point do you switch over to that, and how do you manage that, and then how do you actually curate?
Sure. Okay, so I would never ask an active member to leave the space. Generally, if they're in our space, they've gone through a lot together. So I think it starts at the very beginning with the marketing. So there's not just blanket marketing. Some random person is never going to show up at my door. I mean, it does happen, but usually random people from around the world who I met at co-working conferences. But the community is not being blanket marketed to. So first of all, most people are coming to our space with word of mouth. So they're already sort of a level up in terms of knowing how to work in a co-working space or wanting to be part of this specific community. Another part of my tour is at the very end of the tour. I could go for an hour about the tour itself, but at the end of the tour I hand a postcard that shows them the website for all of the other spaces in my city. And I say, before you sign up here, go check out all of my competition. Most of them are my friends. Say hi to Christine while you're there. Go tour all of the other spaces and find the space that's right for you. That way, the people who actually come back really want to be members at my space. And they're awesome members. So we're sort of avoiding that problem before it happens. Once people are in the space, the community, the sense of community and the way that people engage with each other is really led by example. And so people will feel they either fit in here or they don't really fit in here. If they're not really fitting in the way that we would like them to, we talk to them and we ask them, is there a way that we can make them into a member that we want? Or is there another space that's out there that might be better suited for the way they use this space? If they're on the phone a lot, maybe they need a private office at a business center rather than a co-working community, or maybe they can be trained to use our facilities in the way that other people do. So I would never ask someone to leave the space, but we're curating people as they come in. And then I never try and sign anyone up. So I'm not selling to anyone. If they want to be there, they really have to try to be there. They can't just sign up for a membership online. They have to come in for the tour first. We have to get a feeling. It's really an interview process where I'm interviewing the member rather than them checking out their space.
Okay, so you're interviewing every single member that comes through the space, or one of your
Absolutely. If we've had one bad member one time who lost 35 members in our space, and they were there for 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And that's the perfect example of someone who just doesn't get the tone and
that's
make everyone else leave. So I refuse to let that happen.
Okay. And you're in an established community where it's not so transient. Where we're from in Bali, it's very transient. So the numbers are different. Like we'll have 30 to 50 people walk through in a day for 30 or 50 tours a day. Any recommendations on how to curate that?
I would actually just reframe the tour process again. Instead of them coming in to check you out, you're interviewing them. So when they come in through the space, ask them what they're going to contribute. What do you have to offer? Just flip it, and you're basically interviewing them. Why do you want to work here? What are you going to bring here? And when people actually have to think about what it is that they're going to show up with and present, they become better members instantly. And if someone can't answer that question or says, or gets offended, or I could just go work anywhere else, have fun. That's great.
Okay, thanks.
Anyone else have a question? Right here.
Hi, I'm Dave from Singapore, also the founding curator of TEDx. So I got, I guess, one observation to share with everyone, and then I guess a couple of questions about co-working spaces.
Sure.
So I've been building community. TEDx is not really a space, right? So it's a community first, and I guess it's been 80 years. It's been 8 years, and our community is now 250,000 people. And the first observation is I think the word community is like way too overused. I like to kind of use the word tribe. Because tribe is a lot stronger than a community, right? It's kind of like you really have a strong sense of belonging. And I think in a sense the acid test of a community is that they don't wait for you. If you're an MC, medical leave, and you go off for a week or something, things happen, right? Things don't grind to a halt. And to me, if you don't really have a community or a tribe until that happens, because they're just waiting for you, right? So that's one observation that I've had. And then I guess the other thing is that we seem to always talking about community, but it always comes back to the space. And I'm part of this co-working space and community called Cultivating in Singapore. And I think the great part of them is that they don't think of it just as a space. They think of it as like we are part of the community. And because they're part of the community, then they invite the public to attend stuff. And I think it's kind of flip around. You're a community first that uses space, not you're a space that's trying to find community. I think that's maybe a bigger way of looking at it because you're part of the ecosystem. So the question I have is that have you come across communities who don't work in just that, or the way they think about it is that they're not just thinking about their physical space in the sense, their whole mind is about, it's about our space and bringing people in, rather than it's our space for the community. And even then the community itself can do things even outside that space. So I think that's kind of a more comprehensive, more embracing concept of what co-working means.
Thank you. So 2 things on that. I agree that Tribe feels more genuine and invested. However, where I am building this community in Vancouver, we're actually on the unceded territory of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh Nation, which are 3 Indigenous tribes. And it would be culturally inappropriate and insensitive to call ourselves one. So that's why we don't use that term. However, I do understand what you're saying about those connections running deep, and it is sort of like a family, and you're united over your intention rather than the space. I agree absolutely that community and a co-working community is much more than the space, and I would suggest that most of the co-working veterans, and there are many in this room who you can talk to, agree wholeheartedly, which is why we're not talking about space in the community presentation. I closed my Foundry location about 4 months ago, and the community is still working together remotely from 8 different co-working spaces in Toronto. And I'm watching babies be born, people get married, and communications happening back and forth on Slack every day since we've closed the doors. Nothing has changed other than I'm not responsible for the Wi-Fi anymore. And so I can tell you it really had nothing to do with this space. We had this conversation in great detail at Coworking Europe with a good friend of mine, Tony Bachpaluco from Newark City in New York. And the summary of that entire session, talking about the evolution of coworking, again, is to define it not about the space. We're not operating spaces, we're not renting desks. What we are doing, and this was the summary from the 60 participants of that session, we're making entrepreneurship accessible, we're inspiring and empowering our members, we're defending freelancer rights, we're sharing best practices, we're building community, we're accelerating economic development, we're expanding networks, and we're supporting each other. None of that has anything to do with space. So I agree wholeheartedly.
I've got a question back here. Can everybody hear me? Do I need the microphone?
I'd love to hear your take on community as a service.
You're making me uncomfortable. Only because I don't want to get in a fight on stage. I don't think you can provide community as a service. I think you can lead people to what you're doing through some services. But I actually very strongly believe that most people who are in our spaces are genuinely looking for those connections and to be part of something bigger than themselves, not to be served. And so in the same way, the same reason we don't have receptionists and we don't have someone go tidy the kitchen and take care of those things, even though we could easily afford to in many of the locations, is because it means more to me that every member would go up and gladly make a cup of coffee for anyone else in the space than to have someone do it for them. And because of that, they spend a few more minutes at the coffee in the kitchen and they meet someone. And we're accelerating serendipity in a way that a service wouldn't do. And so I do believe that there are some spaces who provide services for their members, but it's not the community that they're providing as a service. People who just want networking can attend a networking event. People who just want to feel heard can speak. They have social media platforms and other ways they can do that. But I think the people who really want to have those connections are in our space and aren't looking for it as a service. So I do think they're 2 different models.
Another. Okay. You wrote this one down before. You'd be the appropriate person to answer this. What happens if the community gets really strong and over time, like a lot of, which is what you want, and then the members start feeling really quite attached to it, and then they come up against rules that built the community in the first place? How do you manage that? Because they seem to quite get upset when they come up against that rule which was there that enabled them to get to that point. Yeah, does that make sense?
It does. Do you have a specific example? Because I can think of a few depending on what the rule is.
Yeah, so we'll have like a sort of tribe within the community, like a developers group or something, and then we'll have like a corporate come in and sneak their way in, and then start telling all the guys in the community that they're going to sponsor them without going directly to us. Then they go in there and then they invite them all to like a meetup, which is outside of our community, and basically they're coming in to leech on the community to pull all the people out. And then all the people that are in the community go, oh, this is awesome, they're going to give us free beers on this night. And I'm like, well, hang on, it's not awesome. I've just spent $1 million building this place, and you're coming in handing out $300 tickets, and it's not, it needs to go through the co-working space. And then we're like, then they start trying to post all the events into the community. And we're like, no, you're not allowed to do that. Like, and then the members are getting pissed that we're not letting them do that.
Okay, so I think there are two ways to handle that. One would be through the code of conduct. And so in all of our spaces, we have a code of conduct that was created by the members, and with some guidance from the management in terms of what is and isn't allowed legally in the space or through the lease or our insurance. You can easily say you're in breach of the code of conduct, you need to either get in line with how we work here in this space, or you need to move on, and that's one way of handling it. Another way of handling it, since you seem to need more space, is to let the people who are enticed by free booze and whining and dining go. If that's what they want, they should probably go.
What, leave the community?
Yes. In the same way that when WeWork enters one of our markets, or a larger competitor or a corporate competitor enters one of our markets and offers 6 months, 8 months free rent to all of our startups, directly emailing them and asking them if they'd like to go. The ones who leave, I send a farewell note to, have fun. Some of them will come back and go, oh my God, that was terrible. There was no real community. It was a fancy office and free beer. But it made me realize why I was here was because of all of these people and because of how you love us and take care of us and the things you do for us. And other people never come back. And that leaves room for people who are there because they want to be part of that community. So I would suggest it's not necessarily a scary thing. Learning that through the WeWork effect in our markets is one of the best things that's ever happened to my space.
And how did other members, how are they affected by that? Like, you're saying, don't come back.
Well, I don't say don't come back. I say, I hope you enjoy it. You know where we are if you need us. I'm really excited, sort of to myself, that we've opened up space for a new exciting team or members. And we would gladly welcome them if they came back because they realized the community and our community is what was right for them. So there's no hurt feelings there at all.
Good point.
One last question.
What percentage of your monthly budget would you allot for community building? Because we all know that it's very important. But what percentage of the marketing budget?
So we don't have a marketing budget. That's one of the things that I was mentioning earlier. In the 15 years, it's been $500. I'm still handing out the same postcards I printed like 15 years ago because we don't use that very often. So it's not a percentage, it's not a line item. I would say that every staff member is trained on building community. So if you were to look at my staffing budget, you would say all of that is dedicated to community. They may be a director of programming, they might be our director of technology, but I can assure you, even our director of technology is one of the best community builders in this industry. So a large portion of what we do is dedicated to community building, but through everything else. Our furniture is designed to improve connections in the community. Our events are designed to improve the strength of the community and welcome new people into the community. All of our staffing, the same thing. My coffee makers are slower than they need to be to encourage community building in the kitchen. There are a lot of things, even the design of the space when we're doing a new build. So you could say the entire budget is dedicated to that in some way. There's nothing that I'm isolating out. It's the blood of co-working. It's in everything we do.
Thank you.
Thank you.